The hydraulic sigh of the moving truck's air brakes was the sweetest sound I'd heard in a decade. It was the sound of finality, of an anchor dropped in a calm harbor after a lifetime at sea in a hurricane. I signed the final form, tipped the movers generously, and stood on the porch of 124 Willow Lane, watching them drive away until they were just a speck in the rearview mirror of my old life. This was Maple Creek Estates. It was quiet. It was ordered. It was, in a word, safe. After 15 years documenting the chaotic dissolution of order in failed states and war-torn cities, the aggressive normalcy of this place was the only balm I craved. My name is Arthur Vale, and for the better part of my adult life, I was a ghost. I was a byline on stories from places most people only knew as headlines. A voice that brought news of chaos from the brink. That life had cost me. It had etched lines of exhaustion around my eyes and filled my memory with images I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Here, I would be just Art, the quiet fellow at the end of the street who worked from home. The fiction I had constructed was simple and plausible. I was the host of a moderately successful deep dive podcast called The Gray Zone. It was a perfect cover, plausible, tech-oriented, and boring enough that no one would ask too many questions. The reality was that the soundproofed basement of this unassuming suburban house was the new nerve center for a global investigative journalism unit. The Gray Zone wasn't a podcast. It was a top-rated, multi-platform news channel, funded by one of the world's most respected media conglomerates through a series of grants and shell corporations designed to give us an ironclad wall of editorial independence. My team was scattered across 3 continents, a network of researchers, analysts, and data miners who specialized in holding power accountable. We had toppled corrupt ministers, exposed corporate cartels, and brought war criminals to justice. The entire operation hinged on one thing: my anonymity. Here, in the quiet heart of suburbia, I was supposed to be invisible. I was contemplating which of the dozens of brown boxes to tackle first, when a crisp, commanding voice cut through the serene afternoon air. "You're the new owner." It was a statement, not a question. I turned to see a woman in her late 50s standing on the public sidewalk, her arms crossed. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid, aerodynamic helmet. She wore a lavender tracksuit that seemed at odds with her severe expression, and she held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Arthur Vale," I said, offering a neighborly hand. "Just Art. And you are—" She ignored my hand, her eyes performing a surgical scan of my property. "Carolyn Becker. I'm the president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association." Her gaze fell upon the 2 flattened moving boxes I'd leaned against the garage, ready to be stored for recycling day. "First violation," she announced, her voice filled with a grim satisfaction. "Article 6, Section D, all refuse, including moving materials, must be stored out of public view. You have 1 hour to comply before a written warning is issued." I blinked, taken aback by the immediate hostility. I just got here. The truck literally just left. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions apply from the moment of closing. "Mr. Vale," she said, making a note on her clipboard with a pen that clicked with sharp authority. She then stepped onto my newly laid sod, unholstering a small, telescoping metal ruler from a pocket in her pristine jacket. She bent down, with the focused intensity of a forensic investigator, and measured a blade of grass. The motion was so absurdly precise, so divorced from normal human behavior, that for a moment I felt a strange sense of dislocation. It reminded me of a young, nervous soldier at a checkpoint outside of Fallujah who once spent 10 minutes measuring the tread depth on my Jeep's tires, his finger trembling on the trigger of his rifle the entire time. The same obsessive focus on a trivial rule as a way to assert power in a world they couldn't control. 4.5 inches, she declared, as if announcing a guilty verdict. Maximum allowable height is 4 inches. That will be your second warning. A third will result in a fine. I suggest you make finding your lawnmower a priority. She retracted the ruler with a snap. We maintain very high standards in Maple Creek. It's what keeps our property values stable. I trust you'll be a compliant member of the community. She turned and marched back to her own immaculate house across the street, a fortress of beige stucco and perfectly pruned rose bushes. I stood on my porch, the silence she left behind feeling heavier, more charged. My sanctuary, my peaceful harbor, already had a self-appointed admiral, and she had just fired a warning shot across my bow. My search for peace, I realized with a sinking heart, was going to be more complicated than I had anticipated. The first formal notice was a cream-colored cardstock, thick enough to feel important, left under my windshield wiper. The violation: improperly stored garden hose. I had, in my exhaustion after a day of unpacking, left it in a loose loop on the grass instead of coiling it perfectly on the wall-mounted hanger. The notice cited Bylaw 7F, subsection 2. A $25 fine was attached. I stared at it, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I had negotiated with gun-toting rebels over satellite phone access, and now I was being fined for a hose. I paid it online, telling myself it was a tax on the peace I so desperately wanted. This payment, however, was not seen as a peace offering, but as a sign of weakness. It opened the floodgates. Carolyn's campaign of micro-violations became a steady, demoralizing drip. My recycling bin was put out at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the approved 6:00 a.m. window of $50 fine, complete with a time-stamped photo. The small, elegant house numbers I installed were of a non-standard font, a warning, followed by a $75 fine when I didn't immediately replace them. The welcome mat I'd chosen was a 1/4 inch wider than the regulations allowed. I tried reasoning with her once, catching her as she was retrieving her mail. "Carolyn," I began, forcing a pleasant tone. "These fines are getting a bit extreme. I'm doing my best to follow the rules, but it feels like I'm being singled out." She looked at me, her eyes cold and dismissive. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Vale. They are the firewall between a civilized community and chaos. Perhaps if your podcast didn't require so much of your attention, you'd have more time for responsible homeownership." The way she said podcast was laced with contempt. It was clear she viewed my profession as trivial, the self-indulgent hobby of a man who couldn't be bothered with the serious business of lawn maintenance. My internal conflict surged. I wanted to tell her that my hobby had, just last week, resulted in the freezing of offshore accounts belonging to a human trafficking ring. But my operational security was paramount. My anonymity was the shield that protected not just me, but my entire team and the vulnerable sources we relied on. So, I swallowed my pride. "I'll be more careful," I muttered. Her smile was thin and victorious. "See that you do." Back in the sterile silence of my studio, I created a new, heavily encrypted file on a dedicated server, firewalled from the rest of my network. I labeled it Project Nightingale. In it, I began to meticulously document every interaction. I scanned each notice, saved each time-stamped photo, and wrote detailed summaries of our conversations. It was the same protocol I used when building a source file, gathering intelligence on a hostile actor. The irony was grotesque. I was employing techniques designed to dismantle criminal empires to defend myself against the tyranny of the Maple Creek HOA. The escalation, when it came, was as petty as it was malicious. I entered the studio one morning to find the carpet near the small basement window strangely damp. Upstairs, The source was immediately obvious. The sprinkler head on Carolyn's adjacent lawn had been twisted on its riser, aiming a steady, powerful jet of water directly at the window well. It was a classic act of deniable sabotage. She could claim the landscaper did it, or that a dog bumped it. But we both knew it was her. My first instinct was rage. The equipment in that room, the nerve center of my entire operation, was worth more than her house. Even a minor leak could cause catastrophic damage. My second instinct, honed by years of navigating treacherous situations, was cold calculation. Confrontation without leverage was pointless. I spent the day installing a commercial-grade sump pump in the window well and purchasing 4 high-resolution, night vision security cameras. As I was mounting the final one, which had a perfect view of the property line and her sprinkler system, her husband Bob emerged from their side door. He was a soft, beleaguered man who seemed to fade into the background of his own life. "Putting up some security?" he asked, his voice barely a murmur. "A little peace of mind," I replied evasively. He glanced nervously back at his house. "Listen," he whispered, stepping closer. "Carolyn, she used to be a vice president of logistics for a major shipping firm. Managed a budget of $200 million. Then they restructured. Forced her into early retirement. She needs a project to manage, a system to control. Before, it was a global supply chain. Now, it's this neighborhood." He sighed, a sound heavy with years of weary resignation. "Just be careful. She doesn't see neighbors. She sees assets and liabilities." He retreated inside, leaving me with a crucial piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about a power trip. It was about a woman whose entire identity had been stripped away, leaving a gaping void she now filled with the micromanagement of her neighbors' lives. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was a tragic figure, a deposed queen raging against the loss of her kingdom. It didn't make her any less dangerous, but it made her understandable. The next morning, the sprinkler was aimed back at her own lawn. The cameras were working. A week later, my small, whimsical garden gnome was shattered in my driveway. The footage was damning. At 3:14 a.m., Carolyn's Lexus glided silently from her garage, crushed the gnome with a deliberate crunch, and retreated. I saved the 4K video file to Project Nightingale. I didn't confront her. I didn't send her the clip. A strategist doesn't reveal his best intelligence until the decisive battle. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that battle was coming. Having failed to dislodge me through direct harassment, Carolyn pivoted to information warfare. Her chosen battlefield was the private Maple Creek Estates Facebook group, a digital town square ripe for propaganda. Her opening salvo was a masterclass in insinuation. "Hello, neighbors," the post began, dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just a gentle reminder about our community's residential zoning. Lately, some have noticed unusual activity on Willow Lane, odd hours, strange humming noises, and a general lack of participation in our wonderful community events. Let's all be vigilant in protecting the peaceful character of our neighborhood." She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. The comments section quickly identified the target. "Is she talking about the new guy at 124? One person asked. "The podcaster." Barb, Carolyn's ever-present lieutenant, fanned the flames. "I'm not one to gossip, but I've seen unmarked vans there late at night. It's unsettling." The unmarked van belonged to a highly specialized audio engineer who had to calibrate my system after midnight to avoid electrical grid interference. The humming was my server's cooling system, which was inaudible from outside the basement. But reality was irrelevant. Carolyn was weaving a narrative of suspicion, painting me as a mysterious, potentially dangerous outsider. The social climate chilled overnight. My friendly neighbor, Dave, who used to chat with me about sports, suddenly became intensely interested in his shoes whenever I walked by. I cornered him one afternoon as he was taking out his trash. "Dave, is everything all right?" I asked directly. He looked around nervously. "Look, Art, it's just Carolyn's been saying things in the Facebook group about your business. People are worried about property values, about what's really going on in your house. I'm sure it's nothing, but people talk." It was a textbook isolation tactic, one I'd seen used by authoritarian regimes to turn citizens against dissidents. First, you create an other. Then, you attach fear to that other fear of financial loss, of physical danger, of the unknown. That night, I contacted Lena, my lead producer and digital forensics genius based in Berlin. "I need a full workup on Carolyn Becker," I said, pacing the studio. "But I need more than public data. She's running a disinformation campaign against me. I need to understand her network, her pressure points." "You want me to treat an HOA president like we treated that Serbian oligarch?" Lena asked, a note of incredulity in her voice. "She's trying to dismantle my life here, Lena, and it's starting to pose a risk to our operational security. Use your judgment, but find me some leverage." The file Lena sent back 2 days later was illuminating. She had uncovered Carolyn's professional history, confirming Bob's story in stark detail. Carolyn Becker had been a titan in her field, known for her ruthless efficiency. A corporate takeover had led to her ouster, a brutal end to a stellar career. The layoff had been followed by a deep depression and a series of failed attempts to start a consulting business. The HOA presidency was the first position of power she had held in 5 years. Maple Creek wasn't just a project. It was her redemption, her last stand against irrelevance. Lena had also found something else, a flicker of vulnerability. Carolyn was the sole caregiver for her elderly mother, who suffered from dementia and lived in an expensive private care facility 2 towns over. The payments were steep, and public records showed the Beckers had recently taken out a second mortgage on their home. This was her weak point. Not something to be exploited, perhaps, but a piece of the human puzzle that made her actions, if not excusable, at least rooted in a recognizable desperation. She wasn't just fighting for control. She was fighting against the terror of her own powerlessness, both financially and personally. This knowledge shifted my perspective. My anger was tempered by a grim understanding, but it didn't change the strategic reality. She had made me her enemy, and I would have to see this conflict through to its conclusion. The Project Nightingale file grew, no longer just a collection of grievances, but a complex psychological and financial profile of my adversary. The official complaints were the inevitable next step in Carolyn's escalation. Having poisoned the well of public opinion, she now began to weaponize the city's bureaucracy against me. The first was a visit from a city code enforcement officer, responding to an anonymous complaint about an illegal commercial enterprise and unpermitted construction. I calmly invited him in and gave him a full tour of the studio. I showed him the soundproofing, which was so effective he couldn't hear a sound from the main house. I then produced the file containing every permit, every inspection report, and every contractor's license from the renovation. "Mr. Vale," he said, clearly impressed. "This is more up to code than City Hall. Whoever filed this complaint is wasting our time." He left, and I saw the curtain in Carolyn's front window twitch in frustration. Her first attempt at an official attack had been easily parried by my meticulous preparation. This only made her more desperate. 2 weeks later, at 11:30 p.m., I was in the middle of a sensitive interview with a source inside the Kremlin. Suddenly, a violent, percussive banging erupted from my front door, accompanied by the shout of, "Police, open up!" Lena's voice crackled in my ear. "Art, I'm seeing a priority dispatch to your address. Report of a domestic disturbance. A man threatening a woman with a weapon." Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't a noise complaint. This was a swatting. A malicious, potentially lethal false report designed to provoke a massive police response. "My source is compromised if they breach this room," I whispered into the mic. "Terminate the connection. Wipe the buffer." "Done," Lena confirmed. "Be careful." I went upstairs, my hands held open and away from my body, and opened the door. 2 officers had their hands on their holstered weapons, their faces tense. "I am Arthur Vale. I live alone," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "There is no one else here. I believe you've been sent here under false pretenses as part of an ongoing harassment campaign by my neighbor." They insisted on clearing the house. I complied without argument, letting them sweep through every room. They found nothing, of course. As they stood in my foyer, their posture finally relaxing, I made my move. "Officers," I said, "I have high-resolution security cameras covering the entire exterior of my property. The footage will confirm no one has entered or left this house all evening. I would like to file a formal report against Carolyn Becker for filing a false police report, which is a felony in this state." The direct accusation, backed by an immediate offer of evidence, changed the entire dynamic. They took my statement, and I saw a flicker of grim recognition in their eyes. They had seen this kind of neighborhood warfare before. After they left, I sat in the darkness of my living room, the shaking in my hands finally starting. This had crossed a bright red line. A petty feud over lawn height had escalated to a situation that could have easily ended with me being shot in my own home. My first call was not to my network. It was to Sarah Jenkins, my personal lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had handled my affairs for years. I laid out the entire history, from the first fine to the swatting attempt. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Art," she said, her voice tight with anger. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is stalking, libel. And what she just did is a criminal act. The problem is proving it." The 911 call was likely anonymous, from a burner phone. But we can act. We'll start with a cease and desist letter. It's a formal warning. If she violates it, it strengthens our case for a restraining order and a civil suit. It was a logical, methodical, legal approach. It was the right way to do things. For the next few days, Sarah and I worked on the letter, a carefully worded document that laid out the pattern of harassment and warned of severe legal consequences for any further contact. It was a lawyer's version of a shot across the bow. But before we could send it, Carolyn made her final, fatal mistake. The quiet that followed the police visit was unnerving. For a month, there were no notices, no Facebook posts, no confrontations. It was the eerie calm before a storm. I knew she wasn't retreating. She was reloading. She was searching for a silver bullet, a weapon that would finish me for good. She found it by attacking the foundation of my existence, my work. She confronted me at my mailbox, her face a mask of triumphant rage. In her hand, she held a thick envelope. "Vale," she spat, foregoing any pleasantries. "Your game is over. I've done my research. Veritas Media, your little LLC. Very clever. My blood ran cold. Veritas was the public-facing entity I used for mundane operational expenses, a deliberate layer of abstraction to protect my identity. She had managed to peel back the first layer of the onion. "And I've found your sponsors," she sneered, waving the envelope. "Every company that advertises on your pathetic little show. I've drafted a letter. It tells them everything. That you're running an illegal business. That the police are always at your house. That you're a menace to this community. Brand safety is a big deal for these companies. They'll drop you so fast, your head will spin. How will you afford your little basement clubhouse then?" This was it. The ultimate threat. She was threatening to burn down the entire structure of my professional life, to sever the financial lifelines of the gray zone, all to win a battle over lawn aesthetics. In her mind, she had found the perfect leverage. In reality, she had just armed a nuclear warhead and aimed it at her own face. The years of restraint, of patiently enduring her campaign, fell away. The weary suburbanite vanished, and the man who had faced down intelligence chiefs and cartel lawyers took his place. My voice, when I spoke, was devoid of all emotion. "Carolyn, you are making a catastrophic error in judgment. The people you are about to contact are not who you think they are. The entity you are threatening is not what you imagine. Send that letter, and you will trigger a response you cannot possibly comprehend. This is your final warning. Go back to your house, burn that envelope, and never speak to me again." My cold intensity seemed to startle her. For a heartbeat, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. But her ego, her desperate need for this victory, was too strong. "You don't scare me," she scoffed, recovering her bravado. "You're just a sad little man in a basement. The letters go out tomorrow." She turned and marched away. I watched her go, a profound sense of grim finality settling over me. The line had been crossed. I pulled out my phone. My first call was to Sarah, my lawyer. "She's threatening tortious interference with business contracts," I said, my voice tight. "She has a list of what she thinks are our sponsors and is sending them a package of lies tomorrow." Sarah's response was immediate and fierce. "That's it. That's the predicate we need. She's no longer just harassing you as a neighbor. She's attacking your business. This brings the network into it. They have a duty to protect their assets and their employees. You need to inform them. Now." My second call was to a number I rarely used. It connected me to Marcus Thorne, the Director of Global Security for ANN. Thorne was a former Deputy Director of the CIA, a man who understood the intricate dance of information, power, and security better than anyone I knew. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm and analytical. "It's been a while. I assume this isn't a social call." I quickly briefed him on the situation, ending with the threat of the letters. Thorne was silent for a moment. "This individual," he said, "is attempting to interfere with Project Gray Zone by threatening the Veritas asset. The Prometheus Grant Board will view this as a direct attack. The legal exposure for the network is significant if our operational security is compromised by a domestic actor." He paused. "Your cover is effectively blown. We need to transition from defense to an active countermeasure. What do you have?" "A complete intelligence file," I replied, codenamed Nightingale. "It documents every action she's taken: harassment, vandalism, slander, and the 911 call. It's all there. The annual HOA meeting is in 2 days." "Good," Thorne said. "Send the file. I'll have Eleanor Vance from legal and Ben Carter from forensics on a plane tomorrow morning. Your personal lawyer, Ms. Jenkins, should liaise with them. We're going to solve this problem. Arthur. Permanently. The rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a personal dispute. An asset of the Alethea News Network was under attack. The full weight of a multi-billion-dollar global media corporation was about to fall on the head of one Carolyn Becker. And she would never see it coming. The Maple Creek Community Clubhouse smelled of stale coffee and simmering resentment. 40 residents sat on uncomfortable folding chairs, fanning themselves with the evening's agenda. At the front, on a small stage, sat Carolyn Becker, flanked by her board. She was radiant, exuding the triumphant energy of a general on the eve of a decisive victory. The final agenda item was her masterstroke: review of bylaw violations and proposed sanctions, 124 Willow Lane. This was to be my public humiliation and financial execution. I entered quietly and took a seat in the back row. I was flanked by Eleanor Vance, Ann's chief litigator, whose sharp suit and sharper gaze made her look like a predator in a petting zoo, and Ben Carter, the forensic accountant, whose gentle, grandfatherly demeanor belied a mind that could spot a fraudulent transaction from a mile away. My lawyer, Sarah, sat with us, reviewing her notes. We were a silent, well-prepared stormfront, waiting to make landfall. Carolyn launched into her presentation, her voice ringing with self-righteous authority. She showed photos of my offenses, the hose, the lavender, the house numbers. She spoke of the police visits, twisting them into evidence of my dangerous instability. She painted me as a secretive, malicious force that threatened the very fabric of their community. "This man's so-called business is a blight," she declared, her voice rising, "and he has refused to comply, refused to be a part of our community. Therefore, I move that the board levy a special fine of $5,000 against 124 Willow Lane and authorize our council to place a lien on the property until it is paid." Barb, her secretary, immediately seconded the motion. Carolyn beamed, scanning the room for any objection. "Before you vote," I said, my voice cutting through the silence as I stood up, "I believe I have a right to address the board." Carolyn's smile was a slash of victory. "By all means, Mr. Vale, please enlighten us." I walked to the front of the room, my team following in my wake. I turned to face my neighbors. "My name is Arthur Vale," I began. "And Carolyn is right about one thing. I do run a business from my home, but it's not a podcast. It's a news bureau." I nodded to Eleanor. She tapped her tablet, the projector screen behind Carolyn, which displayed the motion against me, flickered and changed. The stark, professional logo of The Gray Zone appeared. "My show," I continued, as murmurs rippled through the crowd, "is an investigative news program. We don't have advertisers. We are funded through the Alethea News Network." The logo morphed again, shifting into the globally recognized sapphire blue Anne. A collective gasp went through the room. Carolyn's face went slack, the color draining from it. Her smugness was replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. "My home," I said, my voice hard and clear, "is a secure broadcast facility for one of the world's largest news organizations. An organization that takes the safety of its journalists and the security of its operations very, very seriously." The screen changed again, this time to a slickly produced news segment hosted by ANN's most famous anchor. "Tonight," his voice boomed from the speakers, "AN launches a new investigation into the abuse of power in suburban homeowners associations. Our first report, compiled by award-winning journalist Arthur Vale, focuses on Maple Creek Estates." What followed was a devastating montage. My security footage of the gnome being crushed, the petty violation notices, screenshots of Carolyn's slanderous Facebook posts, and crystal clear audio of her threatening me at my mailbox. The actions taken by the HOA president, Carolyn Becker, constitute a coordinated campaign of harassment and defamation. The anchor's voice narrated. Eleanor Vance stepped forward. "Carolyn Becker," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "You have been served." She placed a thick legal document on the table in front of Carolyn. "This is a lawsuit filed by the Alethea News Network for several $1 million in damages. The discovery process for this suit has already begun." Then, Ben Carter stepped forward. "Mrs. Becker," he said gently, "as part of our preliminary discovery, we performed an analysis of the HOA's publicly available financial records. We found significant irregularities." On the screen, spreadsheets and bank statements appeared. "Over $80,000 in funds," Ben continued, "have been paid to a landscaping service and a security consulting firm. Both of these companies are shell corporations registered to your maiden name." The room erupted. The foundation of Carolyn's authority, her entire world, crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. For a fleeting second, I saw past the tyrant. I saw the laid-off executive, the desperate woman terrified of irrelevance, who had gone too far and was now facing the abyss. The look wasn't one of hate, but of utter, soul-crushing regret. Then, it was gone, replaced by a mask of numb shock. She had threatened to destroy my livelihood to win a war over the height of my grass. Instead, she had made herself the subject of an international news investigation and exposed her own criminal behavior. Her need for control had led to her losing everything. The resolution was not a swift sword, but the slow, grinding machinery of justice. The A&N lawsuit, with its mountain of evidence, was insurmountable. Faced with financial ruin, Carolyn and Bob agreed to a settlement that stripped them of nearly all their assets. The criminal case, however, was far more devastating. The district attorney, spurred by the media attention and the pristine evidence provided by Ben Carter, filed charges for embezzlement and fraud. Carolyn was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security prison. Bob received probation. The story became a cautionary tale, a viral sensation about the dangers of unchecked petty power. They sold their house to pay the restitution and legal fees, and vanished from Maple Creek, leaving behind only the ghost of a tyrannical reign. The community, shocked into self-reflection, moved quickly to heal. Dave was elected the new HOA president, and the labyrinthine Book of Covenants was replaced with a single-page document emphasizing mutual respect. The neighbors, one by one, came to my door to offer sincere apologies, which I readily accepted. My life settled into the rhythm I had always sought. My work at the Gray Zone continued, a relentless pursuit of truth conducted from the quiet of my basement studio. But now, when I emerged, it was into a neighborhood that knew me, respected me, and left me in peace. I had come to Maple Creek seeking a sanctuary and had found a battlefield instead. But by fighting back, not with anger, but with meticulous, irrefutable truth, I had finally won the peace I had been searching for. I had my home, I had my work, and my lavender, vibrant and unapproved, grew freely in the afternoon sun.